You are feeding the very beast that is trying to consume you, and your counterattacks are the exact fuel keeping it alive. Every time you defend your character, explain your intentions, or express righteous anger, you hand your opponent the exact emotional currency they came for. Conflict is not an obstacle to a high-conflict personality, it is oxygen. Think of a predator tracking movement in the tall grass. It has no interest in static scenery, it hunts motion. The moment you react, you break your camouflage and give away your position. Consider how Cold War diplomats handled hostile interrogations. They discovered a counterintuitive law of human friction: resistance validates the aggressor, but total absence creates a vacuum that starves them out. Yet you keep fighting back, believing that reason will eventually pierce their armor. Here is the mechanical truth behind why your arguments always fail. When you engage, you validate their framing of reality. You accept their premise that a battle is taking place. But what happens when you stop fighting and become entirely uninteresting? Most people think invisibility requires hiding in the dark. It actually requires hiding in plain sight by becoming the most boring object in the room. A seasoned intelligence operative caught behind enemy lines does not run or shoot back when spotted by a patrol. They lean against a wall and blend into the architecture until the threat simply looks away. You have been running, shouting, and bleeding in the open field, wondering why the sniper never misses. What if the reason they keep targeting you is precisely because you make such a magnificent, vibrating target? Those very defenses you rely on are beacons. Every time you flash a sharp comeback, every time your posture tightens or your breath catches, you are broadcasting a live feed of your vulnerabilities. The person hunting for a reaction does not care if that reaction is positive or negative. They only care that you spent emotional currency. The architecture of nothing begins the moment you refuse to open your wallet. Think of your attention as a vault, and every twitch of annoyance as the sound of tumblers falling into place. When you argue, you give them the blueprint. When you defend yourself, you hand them the crowbar. The most lethal counter-strategy to a parasitic personality is not counterattack, it is absolute, chilling economic starvation. Imagine walking into a high-stakes negotiations table in corporate espionage where the rival firm expects you to slam your fists on the desk, only to find you staring blankly past their shoulder as if they were made of glass. That vacuum of response is terrifying to someone who feeds on friction. They lean harder, push deeper, and escalate their tactics, searching frantically for the lever that always used to work. But the lever is gone. You have unbuilt the machinery of your own reactivity. Yet, starving them of anger is only the first tier of the enclosure. What happens when they realize your indifference is real, and they pivot from hostility to manufactured crisis just to force your hand? How do you sustain absolute apathy when every fiber of your nervous system demands that you scream back? You realize that your survival was never about enduring their fire, it was about letting them stand in an empty room until they started burning their own furniture. When you stop feeding an aggressor the emotional friction they require to justify their behavior, a strange geometry takes over. Without your resistance to push against, their momentum flings them outward, spinning wildly until they hit the only remaining obstacle in their trajectory, themselves. This is the apex predator paradox. The wolf starved of prey does not lie down, it turns on its own pack. Think of how fortress commanders in medieval sieges handled unending blockades. They did not sally forth to fight every skirmish. They locked the gates, extinguished the torches on the ramparts, and simply watched from the dark as the invading army, denied any return fire, began to suspect mutiny in its own ranks and slaughtered each other in the tents. In a modern corporate restructuring or a toxic domestic standoff, the principle remains terrifyingly identical. The moment you offer zero surface area for friction, the conflict turns inward. The aggressor starts hunting for ghosts in their own mind, dissecting their own flaws because your silence leaves them no other mirror. They invented a war against you, but when you refuse to show up on the battlefield, they are left bayonet to chest with their own inadequacy. You stop being the target and become the horizon, vast, indifferent, and entirely unreachable. And that is when you witness the quietest tragedy of human behavior. The person who came to destroy you eventually sits down in the dust, exhausted, and finishes the job for you. As the old proverb warns, build your walls so high, and your silence so absolute, that the enemy is forced to breach the only territory left unguarded, his own mind. Build your walls so high, and your silence so absolute, that the enemy is forced to breach the only territory left unguarded, his own mind.